The pools of Jerusalem. And when it's a pool, there's not honestly much archaeology because you go in with very little on you and you come with very little out, they don't find a lot there. But they have found the stones and what it relates to. And so we're going to be talking about those, but actually several things. Not just the pools, but also the pilgrim road that Jesus and the disciples would have walked on. And then also we're going to talk briefly about St. Anne's Church. St. Anne's Church it's kind of an oddball. This might surprise you, but the Catholic Church in history decided to, on several occasions, go, that's a good spot. That's where that happened, and if you pay us money, we'll let you see that. And then they built a church on it. St. Anne's Church is the same exact thing. Next to the Pool of Bethesda is this St. Anne's Church. It is the place where they believe that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was raised. Anne was Mary's mother, and they say this is where she was born and raised, and they have her crypt underneath, and I'll show you those. But it's beautiful stonework. Unfortunately, I can't take very good pictures. It's a little grainy, forgive me. But it is beautiful stonework, and it's one of the only Crusader churches that survived in Jerusalem. This one was built by the Crusaders, by the Romans afterwards, the Roman Church. And most of the time when the Muslims took over afterwards, they would destroy it. And I'll show you the remnants of one that they destroyed in a little bit. But this one they decided to make into a school. The Muslims did. And so because they decided this beautiful building, they'd keep it for the school, it survived. And just several years ago, it actually was bought by the France, the country itself. And so they made a church out of it. And the Franciscan monks have taken it over. But I've got just a little bit of video for you. We went in there, and this will give you just a little sound bit of the acoustics in it. So, I apologize. I gotta go out for this one. I meant to put this one in my PowerPoint, but I realized I couldn't, so I had to change it over. This is our massive group, and that's little old me. And this is my dad, and he's about to lead the singing for this. Let's try it again. So you got a chance to hear it. And what's nice about that video is he went and took lots of video inside the cathedral so you could see how beautiful it was. The acoustics, when you'd sing, the sound would just absolutely surround you. It was the most perfect surround sound you could imagine. Here's some of the tiles. Now, what we did, my dad went down into the pool of Bethesda, and then we kind of split our resources, and then I went to the tomb of St. Anne, and this is going down. I don't think I was supposed to take pictures, I found out afterwards, but you know, it was too late by then and I wasn't going to just delete them, so. But this is the crypt down below, where do they have the... this would actually look like a mother and her son, and you would think Mary and Jesus, but this is actually, that's St. Anne, Mary's mother, and that's supposed to be Mary. And this is actually a very green, it was very dark in there, grainy picture of the crypt itself. An old French Bible and podium where they do services. And that's the outside of St. Anne's Church, and you can see the French flag up above. Now, this is St. Anne's Church, and then right here is the pool of Bethesda, just on the outside of it. And my dad actually got that picture. It was easier to get that photo from his side. But that's all for St. Anne's. It's literally one of those things where they went, yeah, that looks good. We'll pick that place. But we went in there, and it was beautiful. And you can see how they made this into a school later on. And that's what the Romanesque looking churches would have been if the Muslims wouldn't have destroyed them. Now, for the rest of the time, primarily, with the exception of just a little bit, we're going to talk about the pools of Jerusalem. And we're going to talk about the water. Jerusalem was an extremely large city. Obviously, it had many people and a great need for water. But there was only primarily 2 water sources in all of Jerusalem. The first one was the Gihon Springs that we talked about a while back, where Hezekiah dug that big tunnel and where Solomon was anointed king. This was the water that flew out from the ground, and we got to walk through that, and I actually got to drink it. It's fantastic. It's very powerful. The other one is not really a water source at all. They're contraptions like this. This is a cistern. If you want to see a cistern in today's world, at least in the United States, you can go down to the bottom of our hill next to that concrete. Inside that concrete is a water cistern. But what they did back then was they would cut out large sections of stone. And again, this is a group of, I think we had like 80 people, 40 some in each bus. So you can see, this is just the one side of it. It amply fit all of us in there. And without any problem whatsoever. They cut these huge things out, and then what they did is they plastered the side of the walls to make it watertight. And, I mean, you could easily drown in them. Up here at the top, you can see these are the holes where they would gather rainwater from up above, and they would have ditches that would go down in. But can you imagine how wonderful the water must have tasted coming out of that hole? Now, the next slide is also another, it's the only 2 videos that I actually have of my trip. And both of them are actually of us singing. This one is my dad singing solo because Eli Shukron, who is the archaeologist, fantastic guy, very friendly, but I mean, he's very knowledgeable, way up in the Israel government, for archaeologists, I should say. And you just wouldn't know it. He's just a down-to-earth guy. But anyways, at the start of this video, you'll hear us laughing, and it's because he wanted my dad to sing. And on 2 different occasions, my dad thought he was wanting him to sing, and so my dad started. And then Ellie was like, oh no, wait. And then my dad started again. He's like, oh no, wait. It was really funny. But this also helps you hear the acoustics. And you can imagine people hiding out in these places. Now this one, I think it would have been too big for people to hide out in, too much water in them. But when we were at Shiloh, we saw where their water cisterns they actually used to hide from the Romans during the revolt, but it was to no avail. The Romans did find it. But anyways, you get to hear just a little bit again of how the acoustics sound. He had a great sense of humor. He was just a great guy.
I'm not on an ego trip. I'm nothing on my own. I make mistakes and often slip. I'm common flesh and bone, but I'll prove someday just why I say I'm of a special kind. For when he was on the cross, I was on his mind.
Now, I will explain why I wanted to show you those videos in a minute, once we get towards the end. But here is the pool of Bethesda. And it doesn't look like much. It's just a huge, huge gaping hole. We're talking easily 40 feet straight down from the walkway. Remember how I showed you St. Anne's Church and I showed you the little block wall right next to it and I said that's where it started? Yeah, that's where it started. That's where it falls off. Straight down. It's about the size of a soccer field. It had this is only a small portion, I should say, of two large pools. And let me see. Right here on the blue, where I can't find my own marker. Those are the steps, I think. For some reason, I can't find it. Oh well. This is where the bedrock is. This is its lowest point. And I believe the blue was the first level. And then from there, it was built on top, and from there, it was actually built on top. Between the Byzantium and then the Crusaders, all of archaeology agrees that it's a mikveh. Now, this is actually my dad from the other side, and it is a very long distance because even though what you saw was very deep, it's pretty skinny of what they actually found, but there's actually two large pools. Now, let me give you John chapter 5, and it tells the story about this place. After there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda. That means the house of mercy, having 5 porches. Now think about that. If it's a square, how many sides does it have? 4. John says this has 5. That doesn't make any sense. We'll explain it in a minute. Verse 3. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. This is called the sheep gate here. Today it's called the lion's gate because later on the Muslims came in and they carved big lions on the gate, which I will show you in a minute. Verse 5. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been in that condition a long time, he said to them, Do you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, another steps down before me. Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed, and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him, Who was cured? It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed. And he answered them, He who made me well said to me, Take up your bed and walk. Then they asked him, Who is the man who said this to you, Take up your bed and walk? But the one who had healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. And I love that story. It's hilarious discussion. But anyways, here is the lion's gate, and the lions are etched there. But this is also, that is the sheep gate of old. And this will also, here's the Temple Mount. This is the lion's gate, the sheep's gate, in the Muslim quarter, and it's over here. So that just kind of gives you an idea of where it's at in Jerusalem. The problem with this place is it's very confusing. And I was there, and it was still confusing. It's very layered. The white that you see here, okay, this is what the pool was during the time of Jesus. But you come over here to the yellow side, and this is where the Romans had baths and healing places, because the Romans also believed that this was a place of healing. But it was pagan, okay? Next, you have the red here, which is the Byzantine, and they built a church there. Then the Crusaders also built a church there. And so you have 1, 2, 3, 4 different layers. By the way, and here's over here, this is St. Anne's Church, like I showed you earlier. But you have 4 different layers that's all been destroyed, and so you're trying to pick and choose which one is the right one, and it's actually very confusing. But this is what they believe that it would have looked like. You can kind of tell from this picture, I'll show you the next one, it's a little bit easier. These pools, there's 2 of them, they are not symmetrical, they're not symmetrical rectangles, they're trapezoids. One pool is higher than the other, okay? And the way it's designed is so that the water that is in this pool flows down into this pool. And when water is flowing, it's called living water in Hebrew. And living water is special because that is what's used for healing. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But can you count how many walls this has? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. But because it was 2 pools making the one living water, it actually has 5 walls. Which, again, the minimalist kept saying that John was lying, that there's no way this could be the truth. Because how can you have 5 walls? I mean, we haven't found any proof of it. It's not possible. And then once they actually dug it up, they were like, oh, well, I guess it is possible. What do you know? So this is the model of what Jerusalem, they believed would look like. Here's the pools, and you can kind of see that trapezoid now on the lower pool. But this is where Antonia's fortress is at, where the Romans would have stayed, if you believe this model, and then there's the Temple Mount. But we'll get into that when we talk about the Temple Mount. What you see here, these are the vats that the Romans used later on in their pagan worship for healing. Now I want you to think about it really quickly. When was there healing that took place in the scriptures based on the works of the man, or whoever was sick, I should say, of the sick? This is the only place. This story is pretty weird. And I'm not going to say one side or the other, but the fact that the pagans were there believing it to have worship as well, and that it was Jewish for their healing, I kind of wonder if there wasn't something more nefarious actually going on here. It does say an angel came and touched the water, but I wonder if it wasn't more mysticism on the part of the Jews. But I'll leave that, you guys can do your own study on that one. But again, here's those vats, and then you move down this way into those pools. Now, Rick Rimmer suggests that these places, you saw the walls, were designed very beautifully and had 5 porches. And they were made so that you could walk down in them. You could stay up on the porch and then kind of walk down in and go into the pool. It would be a nice place for the rich. It was pretty. But as the water began to dry up, instead of it being for the rich and being for the wealthy and relaxation, as the water began to dry up, the water became stagnant and stinky, and then the rich left. By the time Jesus came on the scene, it was falling into disrepair, full of sick people. Adam Clark suggests that the porticos, those walls that I mentioned, they were actually made to accommodate the sick that were waiting to be healed. We don't know really which one's right, but the original language does suggest that there were so many people, they were literally laying on top of each other trying to get into the pool. That's how crowded this place was. Can you imagine the size of a soccer field, surrounded on the outside and then through the middle, with people literally piled on top of each other trying to get into the water. And this one guy's laid there for 38 years. Sad. This is also part of those same Roman vats that they used for healing. Now we'll begin to see the other sides of it, and this is the remains of the Crusader Church up here on the top. This is the Crusaders. Remember, St. Anne's was a Romanesque church too. They didn't destroy the other one because they used it as a school, but they did destroy this one, and it was literally within very easily a stone's throw. Beyond this arch is the northwest corner, and though it's hard to see, there are usually tall steps that would be leading to the pool. Over here by the red arrow, the arches support themselves, and that was part of the Byzantine church. And so you can see the Byzantine church was below it, and then they built up on top of it. And the Byzantine church came to this side, where the Crusader church went to the other side. Now think about this. Okay? See how deep that is? That is very massive. They didn't find this for, I think it was 1,800 years. Now the reason they didn't find it for 1,800 years is because the Romans, when they came and sacked Jerusalem in 70 AD, they literally did like Jesus said and pushed it all over so there wasn't one stone sitting on top of another. The reason they didn't find this for 1,800 years is because when the Romans destroyed all of this, it was completely leveled off to this spot right here. Completely filled in with debris. And it still is to this day. On this side, all over here, you can't see very well from the picture. That's all debris that's just been compacted. No wonder they had trouble finding it. This is a little bit better picture. You can kind of see the junk that's still in there. Now, as I previously mentioned, the minimalists, they argued that the pool wasn't there, or that if there was a pool there, it was terribly exaggerated. It's not as big as what you say. Come on, y'all. They also said that John didn't write the Gospel of John. They said that the Gospel of John was written around 200 AD, as opposed to 90 AD, when Bible scholars believe that he wrote it. When they found the pool of Bethesda, they realized not only was it written in the time period, it had to be written by an eyewitness. Because at 70 AD, when the Romans literally filled all of this in so that you couldn't see it, there was no way of knowing that this square or trapezoid actually had 5 walls. There was no way of knowing it unless you saw it in person. And of course, the minimalists got to eat one again. It's easier just to believe what the Word says than try to doubt what the Word says. But it gave validity to John writing the gospel, and also John being an eyewitness of the pool of Bethesda itself. Here's still part of the water that's still there, and you can kind of see this is right here. This is bedrock for the pool. But you can even see there, even down at bedrock, that man, he was about 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", so it's pretty deep. All right. This is the basin for the first pool, and that was around the time of Jesus. Here's the pictures. All right. John chapter 5, verse 3. And I'm lost. Okay, verse 12. There we go. They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who had healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn the multitude. I read that. Then Jesus says to him afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said, See how you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. And for this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. What's interesting here is this man had been sick for 38 years. Do you see what Jesus is implying in verse 14? This man had been sick because of a previous sin. Now, do we always get sick because of sin? No. Is all of our sickness caused because of sin? No. But in this man's case, whatever he did, he had laid, can you imagine, he had laid on the side of that pool for 38 years trying to be healed. 38 years. Jesus said, you better stop your sinning unless something worse happens. Sometimes the wages of sin is pretty rough, huh? All right. Let's go to the next one. This is the Pool of Shiloam. And we talked about it a little bit, just briefly, like I mentioned, when we were talking about Hezekiah's tunnel in the spring of Gihon. For many years, and up until 2004, as a matter of fact, they believed that this was the Pool of Shiloam, which is nowhere near the size that it should be. It's pretty small. I mean, literally back here, I don't even think I could get my waist down in that water, if I put my back in my front. They were skinnier back then, I know. I mean, I've added many pounds to what those poor Jews were back then, but this would have been a pretty hard pool to go get under the water for. Now, the other side of that, you turn it around and you go here, and you can see that there are posts. So it had to be at least part of it or something, they believe. And it does connect because it, for one, is in the right area. And that's where Hezekiah built that massive work of art, feat of architecture that was an act of God. But regardless, it was there. And it was somewhere, I think it was right in there where I actually drank from it. And it was actually really good tasting water. I wanted to take it where it first came out of the rock because I didn't want it where everybody had been stepping and sloshing around. But it was good. So you come out and you see there's rocks here. This is Elisha Crone. This is the man that you heard earlier talking with my dad. They were trying to dig a pipe, a water pipe up to fix it. And they were digging with the backhoe and they hit something that was solid. And they thought, this is odd. So they dug a little bit more and there was some more solid. So that was when they called the antiquities. Anytime you do a dig in Israel, you always do antiquities dig. And they did, and they found these rocks. I don't know if I've actually got the picture of it. How you like my dad's socks there? Polka dot socks. He wore them as we went through the Hezekiah's tunnel there and walking through the Gihon Springs, and all his socks were soaked. I didn't wear socks. I put them on afterwards. But this is him showing us some of the finds. They found this gold earring with pearls that's, expensive. But notice in behind him, you see all these, the berm of dirt? That literally does not exist today. We went in November. By the way, I've got my book over there that's got a bunch of the pictures. I highly recommend you flip through it if you want to just see some of the things that we saw by an actual photographer as opposed to somebody like me with my phone. But since November, they actually decided they were able to purchase the land that's in behind here. It was, I think, the Orthodox Church owned it, and Israel bought it so that they could do an archaeological dig of the pool of Shiloam. And I'll show you a picture from it. So it was over here where they actually found that one of those pieces of rock. Oh, it was over here. And then they dug and they found a corner, and they're like, wait a minute, this is not just simple steps. This is a corner to a building. This is important. So then they kept digging, and they got like 15 feet this way, 30 or 40 feet this way, and realized, oh no, this is the pool of Shiloam. And so now they're doing a much bigger dig. What was kind of cool, you see all these people around us up here? Our group only had 80. There was probably 250 people watching, because the archaeologist that did this dig was the one telling the story. And so all of the other guides, even though they weren't on our tour, they were all like, hey, y'all, come here, listen. It was really neat. It was cool that we had the access to have him speak to us. But this is the steps and the bedrock. This is the steps down here. And these are the steps as well as bedrock. The water goes off to the side. It would have filled this section up from the picture I showed you. And that guy probably doesn't look familiar from the back, because he doesn't have a gaping hole in the back of his head that I do now. So anyways, this is where they did some of the reconstruction of the stone for the pool itself. Here is a Roman sword that they found, a bulla. I can't remember which that one was from. But anyways, a bulla, it's a seal stamp. This is a coin. This one is the half shekel that's used for temple use. This they found that were golden. It was a golden bell. You remember how they talked about in the Old Testament that the priests would have bells and pomegranates on their robes? This is one of those bells from the Second Temple period, which is kind of cool.
It looks like a shell.
Yeah, and
It looks like that shell that was.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's true. Yep. Here's that half shekel I was telling you about. And this is as they were doing that dig. This is the road that they call the Pilgrim Road. And if you were going to wash down here at the Pool of Shiloam, then you would make this trek up and you would go to the temple. You would purify yourself first before going to the temple. All of this section right here, it's all gone. It's a massive, massive dig. All right, and here's the passage for this one. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. By the way, being blind from birth was exceptionally bad for healing. In fact, this is the only recorded healing being blind from birth up until this point in the Bible. Only one. And he asked and his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he did some great stuff. He spit on the ground, and he made clay with his spit, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Shiloam, which is translated sent. So he went and he washed and he came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors of those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is this not the one who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, "Well, it looks like him." And he said, "I am he." Therefore they said to him, "How are your eyes opened?" He answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go wash in the pool of Shiloam and wash.' So I went and washed and I received my sight." Then they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. He liked doing that on the Sabbath day. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed and I see." Therefore some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him because he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called his parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, "Is this your son whom was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered them, saying, We know that that is our son, and we know that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age. Ask him, and he will speak for himself. And so then they proceed to go back and forth on this one. "Well, who healed you?" "Well, this guy over here, "Well, tell us the story." "I already told you the story. He came, he put the clay on my eyes, told me to go wash. I went and washed, and now I see. That's all I know." And he's got to be a prophet, and I don't know how you can't believe that he's a prophet, because he's doing the things of a prophet. It's just a good story. Yeah, it's such a good story. I love it.
The fact that the Pharisees at the time, like how they kept making laws and putting these burdens and these bondage on people, that they could spit on like stone or something at the time, but they could not spit on the ground because of that very reason, that it would make mud or clay.
And that's work. Oh,
and that's work. Exactly. So for him to do this work in a way that they specifically said is sinful,
yep.
And that's how he usually make a healing. It's just
unbelievable. So this is the dig. This was a picture back in May. This is where we were sitting. And remember that massive berm? It was like 6 foot tall and about 5 feet from this wall. All of that's gone. They've removed it all. Now, unfortunately, they haven't found what they're looking for, because they still haven't found what they're looking for. I'm sorry, that was a bad song thought. They believe that they've actually got to dig further down. They think that part of the stones for the bottom of the pool that was used, the limestones, were actually used to build the walls and houses around, because that often happened. After destruction, everything's in a pile of rocks, so you use what's there to build your home, and that's what they think has happened. But they do know, because of its location, reported in Scripture, that this is the Pool of Siloam. Next to the Pool of Siloam, as I mentioned, down here is the Pool of Siloam. Okay, there was a pilgrim road. You would wash and prepare yourself to go to the temple, and you would walk up this road. They knew that it was there, but they weren't sure where. Eli Shakron, the one that was showing us those pictures, as he was doing the dig for the Pool of Shiloam, they went to the other side and they found this road. This road leads right up past, right to the north to the temple. And you can see these are the stones that they walked on, and here's the limestone, and it's still preserved. This is all underground. I mean, there's literally houses that are on top of this, several feet, 20 feet above us. But this is what it would have looked like after you washed to go to worship in the temple. And literally, if there is any place that Jesus and his disciples walked in all of Israel, it was on this road. I mean, it had to be on this road, because that's how they went to the temple after being purified. And so we have a bunch of those. Along the side of this road, you can see there are, they found markets, places, storehouses, and when they undug it, they found all of these vegetables, and they were still in good condition. I lied. That's not true. But they did find these markets, though, and so they also know that it was a place of trade and purchasing that was going to the north. And you can see, that's the door. Literally, that is the door to one of the markets with a header across the top, which is pretty cool. This is us walking up. This is a sad side to this story. The reason there are not tiles here is because in 70 AD, in the people's rush to flee and hide from the Romans, who were literally killing everyone, people would remove these large, and I mean, I showed you, those are massive stones. They would pull them off, and they would take some like food and things, and they would hide their families underneath the rock, the stones of these. These are jars that they actually found underneath. The problem was they didn't fool the Romans any, and the Romans went in there and they killed everyone, like they did in Magdala. So it didn't matter if you hid your children or not, they were still going to die. And they put these glass over it so you know that those were some of the places that they found. Very sad. But this is the place where Jesus would have walked. And this is a picture of, I took that picture of my dad standing on that walkway because my dad was really excited. He'd heard about this archaeological dig and he wanted to be a part of it. It's kind of neat. This is how they do the dig. See that bucket up there? Let me see if I can do the highlighter here. Laser pointer, there we go. Right in here, this is a conveyor belt system that instead of the stuff riding on top, it actually rides below, and you put all the dirt and the rocks in the trunk, the bucket below, and then it would send it out so you didn't have to carry it, because this is quite a ways. But anyways, it was pretty neat. And my dad took that picture of him standing on the stones where Jesus walked. It's pretty neat. So in closing, very quickly, I wanted to talk about the difference between living water and cistern water. Water was especially essential in ancient times. But even in today, in modern cities, including Jerusalem still, water is vital. You have to have, if you have a place where you get 1 inch of rain, 5 inches of rain a year, you got to find some way of getting water to feed millions of people. They wash their clothes, whatever. You need this. Moving water, what we would say moving water, Jews would call living water, and you find it all over the Bible. It was highly desired. Let's face it, if you had the choice of a cistern, doesn't that water look appetizing? Or you had this clear, flowing, cool water out of the rock, which would you prefer? You'd want the living water. Well, I tried to say November. In Numbers 19, the scripture tells us that the use of living water, running water, moving water, was used for the healing of diseases and sicknesses, including things like leprosy. If you felt like you had been healed of leprosy, you went to the priest inspected it, you went and washed, and then you came back in a week and you washed again, and if it had reduced, then you were allowed to come back into public. This living water, it was fresh, it was usually cleaner, it was cooler, and I'll be honest, it was actually good tasting water. I didn't drink from that one. Do you blame me? Where the cistern water is much different. They only used cistern water out of necessity. It was often stale, dirty, stinky, and it was warm from the summer sun, or from any sun at that point. You only used it if you had to. And to be honest, sometimes that water was dangerous. Remember when we talked about Qumran, those Essenes died at a very young age because they kept washing in those same cisterns several times a day, and there was no exit point, and it killed them early. Tonight we've talked a lot about the different pools, and both of the places that we talked about were living water. They were moving water, and in fact the pool of Bethesda was designed specifically with the pool up above so that the water would flow down into the bottom pool so it would be considered living water and used for healing purposes. All throughout the Bible, the word uses this idiom, this living water, as a picture. And specifically, the living water and the cistern water, God makes a contrast to. In Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13, God contrasts these two different types of water. For my people have committed two evils. So they've sinned twice. The first one, they have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters. And the second is they've hewn for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that hold no water. Think with me about the imagery. I just showed you the picture, right, back here, of the difference between living and cistern water. Okay? This is the imagery God's giving them. You all have sinned twice. The first one, I gave you fresh, cool, clean, delicious flowing water, and you turned away from it. You left it. You literally turned 180 degrees and walked away. You forsook it. That's the first sin. That's bad enough. The second sin, though, is that they dug their own wells that didn't even hold water. They did their best. They fought hard. And I mean, can you imagine? I showed you that cistern where my dad was singing. It was a massive, massive complex. It would have took a long time to dig that in solid rock. And they had this beautiful flowing stream, the Gihon Springs, just wonderful water. And they turned their back on it and made it hard on themselves and built their own cisterns that didn't hold any water at all. And now they're left thirsty. What God is implying here, it's actually pretty simple. Go back to the spring, you dummies. It's still there. Just go back and get the water out of there. Stop fishing in the cistern. Let me take you to a New Testament passage. Last one, I promise. To illustrate exactly this point. And it's Jesus, the one that is actually giving us the illustration. It's in John chapter 7. It's one of my favorite passages in the Gospels. So I'm going to set the scene for you. This is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Lights. This is the celebration where they celebrate the last harvest of the year, and now they're praying for good rain to come during the winter so that there's water for the spring planting season. What they do is everyone comes together. In the Feast of Tabernacles, they stay outside in those little booths, they're supposed to be able to see up into the stars. They take their family out there into these tents, and it's supposed to be this wonderful feast. You literally go out camping with your family to remind you of being out in the wilderness, preparing to go into the Promised Land. That's the idea. It's the last day of the feast. And on the last day of the feast, what they do is they bring all of the people together to the temple. The temple is lit with these huge, massive lanterns that were so bright you could see them all the way to the Mediterranean coast. People are shoulder to shoulder, jumping up and down, shouting and singing praises to God as the priests go down to the pool of Shiloam. And they dip the water from the Gihon Springs, and they take it up and they pour it on the corner of the temple. As they're pouring it on the corner of the temple, they're praying that God would give them an outpouring of rain for the winter, but also it was imagery for the Holy Spirit being poured out in times to come. So this massive party is going on. People are shouting. It's ear-deafening singing inside the temple complex. This is all going on. And now you come to John chapter 7, verse 37. As the priests are preparing to pour the water, signifying the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, and the living water being poured out, this is what John tells us. On the last and most important day of the festival, Jesus stood up and he shouted. The point was, he shouted so loudly, it was above the ruckus, above the singing, above the party. He shouted it at the top of his lungs, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Forget what the priests are pouring out over there. Come to me. The one who believes in me, as the scripture has said, will have rivers of living water flowing from his heart." Now he said this about the Spirit, whom those who were believing in him were to receive, because the Spirit was not yet present and Jesus had not yet been glorified. Jesus says in the middle of that, screams it, interrupts the whole entourage. Everything that's going on, can you imagine the picture? Jesus screams, "If you're thirsty, if you want water that's better than that will continue to flow, you come and talk to me." What a beautiful picture. There's a hymn, I don't know if y'all know it, but it says, "All my life long I have panted for a draught from some cool spring that I hoped would quench the burning of the thirst that I felt within. But hallelujah, I have found him whom my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies my longings, and through his life I now am saved. Well of water ever springing, bread of life so rich and free, untold wealth that never faileth, my Redeemer is to me. Hallelujah, I have found him, whom my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies my longings, and through his life I now am saved." As the best living water that Israel could ever find, they rejected on that day. But the good news for us, it was an open invitation. Just like the Father said back in Jeremiah, "Just come back to the fountain, dummies." Jesus says, if you're thirsty, just come to me. If you want more than you have right now, it's an open invitation. Just come to me, and I will satisfy your thirst. Let's pray. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.